Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. This is the True North Report, here to bring you the news that every Canadian needs to know. So we got a few things that was on the agenda today, so we're going to jump right into it. A couple stories about the Prime Minister and what he's doing. We're going to talk a little bit about what ended up happening in Iran. As you can see, actually scrolling across your screen right now, the U.S. is blaming Iran for an attack that took place on some oil tankers over in that area. So we're going to cover that, and then we're also going to be talking about something very briefly at the end I want to talk about is something that came out of blacklocks.ca, and just sort of the dangerous precedent that it is setting for the future. So let's get into this right now. The first thing we're going to be talking about is a gaffe by our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, where he was asked about what he does in order to reduce his plastic use, considering that the Canadian government is considering a complete plastic ban when it comes to one-use plastic material. So this would include straws, plastic cutlery that you get in restaurants, plastic bags, and many other things as well. And it's gotten so bad that the Prime Minister has been getting mocked online. I mean, he gets mocked for a lot of things online, but this one was not just a stumbling over words, but just sheer stupidity. Now, he's definitely done this before. We all probably remember the "I'm reorienting my thoughts" gaffe from about a year ago, where he took a minute and said absolutely nothing. But this is right up there with that, so we're going to take a quick look at it.
He switched to drinking
What do you and your family do to cut back on plastics?
We have recently switched to drinking water bottles out of when we have water bottles out of a plastic, away from plastic towards paper, like drink box water bottles sort of things. There's a number.
Yep, you heard that right. He is switching off of plastic bottles over to plastic paper box thingies. Now, this has been getting him a lot of crap online, a lot of people trolling him over this. I decided to start off on a little bit of a lighthearted note today with this because the conservatives especially have been capitalizing on this and using it. There was one conservative, one lady that's running for the conservative riding that was talking about pretty much grabbed a box of water and tried to drink it in a video that she posted on Twitter, and it was good fun. I didn't manage to find it when I was looking through it, but the thing is too is that despite the fact that he is talking about banning stuff such as plastic water bottles, he and the other members of his cabinet, especially someone like Catherine McKenna, the Minister of Environment, they have been caught time and time again in videos and in pictures of them using plastic water bottles constantly, and now they're going to lecture Canadians about the need to switch off of plastic. It's not going to go over very well. I mean, many people, for certain things such as bottles, are probably going to try and make the switch back to glass instead, but there's just a number of problems as to why this doesn't work. So, getting into something a little more serious, there was a video that ended up getting released recently, just over the last few days, and it was by Memory. Now, I have some problems with Memory the way it is. There has been a lot of speculation about when they're translating stuff from Arabic to English, what is really being said. But as we can see from there, it's actually just behind my little avatar head here. But what it says on here about Memory is an official Twitter account of the Washington, D.C.-based Middle East Media Research Institute. Now, some people have criticized it for this exact reason, that they don't translate it from Arabic to English properly, and that when they're doing so, it is actually... It's putting words in the mouths of the people who are speaking, so they're saying things that they're not actually saying, or it's taking stuff out of context. But regardless of any of that for right now, that doesn't really matter, considering the fact that this is in English that they're showing. But this is quite shocking what ends up getting said by this young woman right here. So we're going to jump right into her.
Israel, as is the state of Israel. And Canada is a white supremacist, colonial, racist project, as is Israel, as is the state of Israel. So I don't even consider myself to be a Canadian because this is indigenous land and this land is occupied. So the people who are here, whether they are settlers, we firstly need to educate ourselves about what has happened on this land and what is continuously happening in order for us to be able to understand what our government or this government is doing on abroad and on overseas.
This is the resistance that we're going to continue to see, and as a result, neighboring countries and those who are fighting in solidarity all around the world will also rise with the Palestinians, and we will see in the next 20 to 25 years the decline and the ultimate destruction of the illegal Zionist state. This is for certain. This is not a conspiracy theory. The Zionist regime cannot continue to continue this path as injustice and all oppressors are doomed.
Okay, so that's a video right there of a young woman that's not only criticizing Israel, but criticizing Canada as well, and says she doesn't even consider herself a Canadian, how this is a white supremacist colonial project, this country of ours. And I don't know about everybody who watches this, but I personally consider myself to be a Canadian patriot, a Canadian nationalist who believes that our country is one of the best countries that has ever existed on the face of the planet. So to hear a young woman like that say something as grotesque to me as she doesn't even consider herself a Canadian when she's living in our country. This took place at the Quds Day rally in Toronto, and there was a lot of things to criticize about this. There were people that were calling for the absolute destruction of Israel, and for those who have watched some of my previous videos, you'll know I am not a fan of Israel, but to call for its absolute destruction is sickening to me. And I find it a little bit funny because despite the fact that the media and many people on the left want to act as if white supremacy and white nationalism is a serious problem in Canada, the opposite is true. But I find it funny on two platforms, two levels right here, what she says. First of all, she's more or less making the arguments of white nationalists and white supremacists themselves, because many of them want a white ethno-state, or at least on the alt-right. I'm sure many white nationalists do as well. But she's giving them the exact reason why, because many don't consider a lot of immigrants here. They consider them not to be very patriotic and have dual loyalty. Loyalty to, maybe some loyalty to Canada, but loyalty to the countries that they came from. She's more or less confirming this when she says she doesn't even consider herself Canadian, yet she's living here in Canada. So she's willing to come in, take all the benefits of our country, and then spit on not only our country, our flag, but the people who live here, who are born here, who are raised here, who love this country. She'll spit on all of them for her own personal points of view, her own personal needs. No respect for the country that she came to. She may have even been born here. She seems like she speaks pretty good English, so I'm going to assume that she has. But quite clearly, somewhere in the recent past, her family immigrated to Canada, and this is the way she talks about the country that took in her family, probably from a country that was either war-torn or just a piece of shit country. And second thing about that I find kind of interesting, is she considering herself in that category of colonialism? Because she's talking about how it is indigenous land that ended up, that has been settled by the white occupier, essentially, but yet she's living in this country. So she must fall into that same category that she criticized, that is colonialism. And third thing is actually if something that happens, as I said a lot on the left, is that we are a nation of immigrants, yet at the same time, that nation of immigrants are colonizers who colonized and destroyed the indigenous people. So she just made an argument against immigration without even realizing it. Because if the immigrants who came by in the past, since our country is a country of immigrants, then ended up destroying the local population, then what would the immigrants of today be doing? And this is what a lot of people consider. Putting myself out there, I am not exactly pro-immigration these days, and I haven't been for some time. I'm not one of those people that says shut down the border altogether, but I want to significantly reduce immigration to our country because I don't think it is a net benefit. I think actually in a lot of ways it is a net negative. So she's more or less making all these arguments all at once. She's making the argument that a lot of immigrants have dual loyalty. She's making the argument that maybe immigration shouldn't happen because if we're a nation of immigrants that comes in and destroyed the local population, then this is exactly what's happening today with the immigrants that are coming in. And then thirdly, she doesn't put herself into this situation. Now, I said I'm not a fan of Israel for plenty of different reasons that I've laid out in the past. One, I think that a lot of the wars that end up getting fought in the Middle East are for Israel's benefit, that they get countries like America to come into and fight their wars, do their dirty work for them, and they reap the benefits of that. And then I also find it interesting that of all these wars where we create a refugee problem, it's then taken into these the European and North American countries, and then they have to deal with it, and then they have to deal with the resentment that comes out of these wars. I know they do a lot of spying on all of their allies, and I mean ridiculous amounts of spying. I know they scrub the internet when it comes to places such as Wikipedia and social media, which they have admitted themselves. You can, at least when it comes to Wikipedia, you can very easily Google search this, and you may have to do a little bit of digging, but you can actually look into and see how the Israeli government, the Israeli intelligence agencies, actually do go on social media and they try and silence and censor anybody who speaks out negatively against the state of Israel. I also have a lot of problems with the way that they treat the local Palestinian population over there. But that being said, I don't agree with the destruction of an entire nation, something that has been advocated for during this Quds Day rally. It's kind of disgusting that we allow a rally like this to take place in Canada. And the thing was, too, is this was an illegal rally. No permits were actually purchased for this rally, yet they ended up going out, blocking traffic, blocking streets and sidewalks, and nothing was done about this. Nobody ever wants to talk about the problems of radical Islam. In fact, there was just something the other day I saw in the newspaper where it was talking about how a woman who was dressed in a full niqab, the bus drove by her, and then she ended up figuring out who the bus driver is and reporting him as committing a hate crime against her. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I have had buses drive by me more times than I can count. It is not a hate crime. It might be an asshole bus driver. Many times it's a full bus. They can't take on anyone more. But this was not a hate crime. But this is the sort of thing that's brought in. And then even how we're allowing Sharia law, Sharia courts to be allowed in civil lawsuits. It's only a matter of time until it's brought into federal courts. And I may have already, and I'm just not aware of it. But this is a few reasons why I want to significantly reduce immigration, and most certainly want to significantly reduce immigration from Islamic countries for this exact reason. And there's even something very recently about how 2/3 of Canadians don't feel that immigrants adapt to their society as much as they should. It's quite obvious that many people are not happy with the current state of immigration in Canada, and you don't even have to look far to show how many of them just get into their small little groups together and just carve out a little section of their homeland here in Canada. I mean, we have Chinatown, and then you can look around and find these Arabic communities that have carved out a little section of the Middle East for themselves, and it just causes conflict among the different groups of people. In the States right now, especially in the southern states, such as southern states and southern cities, like LA is a big one, the conflict that ends up happening amongst gangs are not necessarily so much amongst black on black gangs or white on white gangs, but it is actually amongst the black gangs and the Hispanic gangs down there. They're actually fighting amongst each other. So this is just showing the direction that we're going in, and we can even look at the current state of Europe right now to see where we're headed. But let's move on. Oh, and this is something else that could sort of tie into what I was just talking about. The Liberals give Canada Summer Jobs Grant to charities suspended by the CIA for allegedly financing terrorism. The Islamic Society of North America Canada, ISNA Canada, has been approved to receive the Canada Summer Jobs Grant despite its charity status being suspended for 1 year by the Canada Revenue Agency over concerns of financing terrorism. The Liberal government has awarded the Mississauga-based organization with $25,787 despite knowing the group's past affiliation. ISNA Canada abhors and rejects terrorism in all its forms and categorically denies any terrorist links. We remain politically impartial and are not linked to any political or extremist group, says the organization about the alleged affiliation. However, in 2018, the charity was suspended by the CRA for 1 year and fined $550,000 for allegedly transferring a large sum of money to an area dominated by a militant Pakistani group engaged in fighting India. According to the audit documents, ISNA Canada gifted $90,000 to the relief organization for Kashmiri Muslims and $46,000 to the Kashmiri Relief Fund of Canada. Both groups have been known linked to the Pakistani political party Jamiat-e-Islami and its armed wing of the Hizbul Mujahideen, who are listed as a terrorist group in both the United States and Europe. This is not the first time this has happened, and it most certainly will not be the last time that this has happened. I know that if you were to go onto the public safety website, Canada Public Safety website, you go underneath counterterrorism, and then you look up the groups that are listed as terrorist groups. The vast majority of them are Islamic groups, and well-known Islamic groups as well. But this has been going on so many times. Irfan was one. Let me look up what the acronym means again, because it's slipping my mind right now. Irfan. Irfan. Anyway, this group was a charity that was set up in Canada as well as the US, and it was funding a bunch of different radical Islamic groups in the Middle East. So this has happened time and time again. Where is it? Irfan, the International Relief Fund for the Afflicted and Needy. That's Irfan. And they actually ended up getting shut down because of it. In fact, right from the very get-go, from the time that their charity was established, that was exactly the point of it. It was meant to send money over to the Middle East for these Islamic extremist groups. So, just goes to tie back into everything I've already talked about. Okay. So, let's get into what I really want to talk about today, which is U.S. blames Iran for tanker attack in the Gulf of Oman. Oil prices rise. 2 oil tankers were attacked on Thursday and left adrift in the Gulf of Oman, driving up oil prices and stoking fear of a new confrontation between Iran and the United States, which blamed Tehran for the incident. It is the assessment of the United States government that the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman today, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told reporters in a brief appearance without providing hard evidence to back up the U.S. stance. This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy groups operating in the area had the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication. So this is what we know so far, is that there was 2 oil tankers that ended up getting attacked in the Gulf of Oman. But we don't know what really took place over there. It's easy for the U.S. to blame the Iranians for this attack, but we don't actually know if it was the Iranians. They say that they don't have any other group, but for all we know, this could be a false flag from the U.S. who made this attack, even if it's not officially on the record. But if this was a Black Ops mission where they're not acting under the military banner, they send in their special forces who don't have any markers or dog tags, this is quite possibly what ended up taking place. I don't know, I'm just speculating. But the reason is that there has been this push for confrontation with Iran for a long time now. And this has been stoked by President Donald Trump as well. He has taken to social media, he's made public statements against Iran, which seems like it's leading for a buildup for a war against Iran. This is also the president who said that he was going to pull his troops back and not get involved in these international conflicts anymore. Yet he has been just as bad, if not worse, for things such as drone strikes and launching missile attacks. The thing is, though, and this goes back to when I was talking about earlier about Israel, is I have a feeling that Israel was involved in this whole situation. Because we look at things such as the Yenin Plan and the Greater Israel Project. All of these are meant to return Israel to its territory pre-biblical times, territory from pre-biblical times. So in pre-biblical Israel, the land of Israel stretched from the River Nile all the way to the Euphrates River. And the thing is when you kind of look at things that are said, public statements made by the government, and there's the plan and how things are playing out in the Middle East, it seems to me like this is exactly what Israel is trying to do. So, and they have also taken the fight against Iran, I would say, before Donald Trump did. They were the one who told the U.S. to axe the Iranian deal, I forget the name of it right now, but the one that would prevent them from getting nuclear weapons. Now, I don't necessarily think that was the best deal. I don't know how effective it was. I've seen enough reports that said that it seemed like Iran was trying to get a nuclear weapon. Whether that's just propaganda or not, I don't know. But as far as I can tell, I was never a big fan of the Iranian deal there. But then Israel comes out and say they got hundreds of thousands of records that proved that Iran lied and that they were the one, and they were actually trying to get a weapon and push for war. Now, a war with the U.S. or any of our allies is not in the best interest of Iran right now. And what did Israel show us? What did Benjamin Netanyahu in this grand unveiling really show us? He showed us a bunch of discs that were supposed to have this information on it. He showed us a bunch of paper documents, but nobody actually got a look at it. Nobody really got to open up, check the information, and see what was inside those files. So all we have to go on is Benjamin Netanyahu's word. And I don't trust Benjamin Netanyahu's word because he's proven himself to be a war hawk. It was him who came to the U.S. Congress and told them that Iraq is building weapons of mass destruction, and you need to stop them right now. Future generations will thank you for it, and blah, 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 blah. So the U.S. go into Iraq, and there are no weapons of mass destruction. Absolutely none. So Israel intelligence has proven to fail quite drastically in the past. Not even finding the evidence of it, we just didn't find it. But that war was prolonged because there was an interview with a CIA agent who, when Saddam Hussein ended up getting captured, he was one who was interviewing Saddam Hussein. He said, but before the first year of the Iraq war was out, that that he had already interviewed Saddam Hussein, and that he didn't believe, he said that there was no evidence really to prove that there were any weapons of mass destruction, yet the war carried out for several more years. Millions of, I think we're up to at least 1 million Iraqis ended up getting killed, both military and civilian, and we had thousands of American soldiers who died in the process. This war, and none of the wars in the Middle East, has ever benefited the U.S., and I don't trust them when they say that they're going in to spread democracy, for instance, because they got one failed, really wasn't that effective, democratic election in Iraq, and everything fell apart. And it has ever since, and they never really tried to reestablish democracy there. I think the whole push for democracy is really just a cover. But you kind of look at a map here. So here's our map of the area. I think all these wars are really being pushed by Israel, who apparently is America's greatest ally, It's being pushed by them because it benefits them, but they want America to do their dirty work. So we kind of get in on this area. So the greater Israel area would stretch from about right here, about where the River Niles is, to something around this area. I think around here is roughly where it is. Hold that thought. Okay. Yeah, so it's about this area here, maybe sort of down this area. So all of the areas that encompasses what was pre-biblical Israel would be Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, some of Saudi Arabia, but they have more or less become friends with the Israelis recently. But I see how all these wars are taking place in the Middle East, are being fought by America, don't benefit America, so coming in this area, and then all the refugees are heading over to Europe, and are heading over to the United States, and heading over to Canada, and we're the ones that is dealing with all of these situations, dealing with the immigration crisis, the refugee crisis, dealing with trying to integrate these people on mass scales that isn't working, that's been proven that it's not working, having these conflicts and having the increase in crime when Israel doesn't end up having to take anybody on. I mean, don't forget that just recently, Israel ended up rescuing, quote unquote, the white helmets from Syria. And then they said, oh, we rescued the white helmets. Now we're going to send them over to Canada, the UK, and I think France was the other one that they were sending to, maybe Germany. But they're sending them off to all these countries, aren't looking after them, actually. They're just shipping them off to other places. Yet we know that the white helmets have been affiliated with al-Nusra, who is a subgroup of Al-Qaeda, pretty much, or like an affiliated group to Al-Qaeda. We've seen such as the Al Jazeera documentary about the white helmets, where they ended up having showing them when they were back at sort of their home base or where they were camping for the night, and there was an ISIS flag right behind them. We've seen video of the white helmets disposing of the victims of ISIS, and I don't mean like picking up after them, got to the scene after ISIS. I mean, they were doing ISIS's dirty work by disposing of these bodies. We've seen how they faked a lot of their so-called rescue attempts. There was the one where they were doing the mannequin challenge, in which they were supposedly, quote unquote, helping someone who is injured, but they freeze in place, and even the man who's apparently injured just freezes in place for a good 5 to 10 seconds, and then they start moving again, and this quote-unquote injured person ends up screaming as if he's just had a building fall on top of him. The white helmets are not the heroes that they play them out to be. And if we know that, then the Canadians know that, Israel knows that, and many of our other governments and intelligence agencies know this, yet Israel is shipping them off to us to deal with. So this is why I believe they are behind what's really going on in Iran. And Trump has proven himself that he is quite fond of the Israelis. I mean, his whole family has married into Jewish families. His son-in-law, who is an advisor for Trump, has been a good friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, Jared Kushner, a good friend even to the point where Benjamin Netanyahu slept in Jared Kushner's bed when Jared Kushner was a child and have stayed in close contact ever since. And all of these wars go to benefit Israel to make them the main superpower in that area and tearing down all these other countries. Again, Saudi Arabia is partnered up with Israel in recent years, but the only main powers that remain, excluding Israel in this, but the only main powers that remain are Iran and Saudi Arabia. The two don't like each other whatsoever. Completely different. Iran is a Shia Muslim country. Saudi Arabia is a Sunni Muslim country. Maybe I have that reversed, but I'm pretty sure I have that right. And we look at the buildup leading up to this confrontation. So first things first is that one of the problems, here's the Gulf of Oman where this whole situation ended up taking place. Why this war would not go well for the US. Maybe they'd win, maybe they wouldn't. But the point is they would suffer absolutely heavy casualties leading up to this war. I mean, throughout this war. It wouldn't be quite like Iraq, where the war was quote unquote easy for them. It really wasn't that easy, but it wasn't exactly challenging either. This was not like World War II or another Vietnam where they were losing thousands upon thousands all the time. I mean, I think 50,000 Americans were killed in Vietnam. I think 5,000 were killed in Iraq, but that was enough that were killed out there. But anyway, so we have down here the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. This whole area is heavily guarded by the Iranians. Military bases, anti-aircraft guns, missile tubes, the whole kit and caboodle in order to defend that Gulf from being invaded. And it's probably most likely Saudi Arabia that they're mostly worried about. But if the Americans wanted to invade, if they wanted to launch put their navy into place, this is where it would end up being, because the only other option is the Caspian Sea. But the Caspian Sea is not connected, as you can see, connected to the ocean itself. So in doing so, the Americans would only be able to enter through the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, where they would suffer heavy casualties. Now, leading up to this confrontation that we're seeing between Iran and America, the U.S. has knocked out Iraq and Afghanistan, and in a place in their country have established bases, military bases. America's got them all over the world. So they have these bases that is bordering Iran right now, perfect if they wanted to launch an attack against the Iranian people. They would face an attack on both sides, which is, you always want to fight on one front. Getting hit from two different sides is never good. It's worse when you're having one in front, one in back. So this would be America's probably initial attack stage. I think they would probably use their bases in, I don't know, maybe Iraq would probably where it starts, but they would be more or less coming in together. But it wouldn't be so easy. Without a doubt, they'd try and make their way to Tehran. Because it wouldn't be so easy, because Iran's military are not pushovers. They got a strong military force that would be able to put up a good defense against the Americans, without a doubt. But the other problem that they have is not only they wouldn't have much in the way of naval support, because it would be very difficult for the Americans to break through. But then even air support would become much more difficult. And even approaching on the ground would be very difficult, because Iran is not like Iraq. It's not this desert country. It actually has a lot of mountains, a lot of hills, so it's difficult to traverse, and it's also has because of these mountains and because of these large hills, it'd be very difficult for air support to get in there, mostly because there could be anti-aircraft guns, or even just a guy holding an RPG anywhere amongst that area that could start shooting down your helicopters. So air support would be very difficult. You'd be sending in a lot of your ground troops into hilly terrain and mountainous terrain, where there is a perfect chance of getting ambushed, getting caught by surprise, even just missing military bases or guerrilla groups that are out there. So this would not be an easy war. And maybe they win, maybe they don't. But at the end of the day, it would be a war like America has not seen since Vietnam. Yet they're still pushing for this war. And how would taking Iran out of the picture actually benefit America. It really wouldn't. Sure, Iran has burned the American flag in their Capitol buildings. They have shouted death to America, but Iran doesn't really have the ability to make it over to the United States. More than anything, it's a matter of resources. Where would they get supplied if they were to go over to the States? I mean, you look at it, they would have to travel one way or the other. I think maybe they would probably head west or east, and try and hit America on its west coast. They're kind of like literally on the opposite side of the world, so they could go either way. But they would have to travel all the way over the States, and then where do they get resupplied from? They would have to constantly be either flying in supplies or even taking them by boat. There's just not an area here for them to resupply. I think if they were to do this, they probably would head east and hit America on its west coast, because if they were coming from the opposite direction and trying to hit America on its east coast, well, then they can now be flanked by America's allies, the British, the French, and it would not be a ideal situation for the Iranians. Now, on the flip side, if America was to attack Iran, as I've already stated, they've got all these bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as having, Israel's right here, so they can supply them. They've got the Saudis who can supply them. And then they even have their countries over here that aren't, in the grand scheme of things, aren't that far away, that they could supply the Americans with food, reinforcements, fuel, whatever they really needed. At the very least, the Americans could use these allied countries to send these supplies to their troops. So I wouldn't really be concerned about the Iranians trying to attack America, but the Iranians are under threat of possibly getting attacked by the states themselves. And the more I look at it, the more and more I feel that Israel has its cards in the game in order to carry out and to ensure that America carries out an attack such as this, does the Israel's dirty work for them. This is why, over recent years, I used to be a very pro-Israel individual. But as I started looking into this, the spying that they do on different countries, their allied countries, I mean, awful spying, this theft that they have done. Don't forget, Israel has nuclear weapons, has not signed on to the International Arms Treaty, the Nuclear Proliferation Agreement. I think they're probably one of the only countries with nuclear weapons that is considered an ally to the States and Europe that is not signed on to this. And how did they get the nuclear triggers? They stole it from the US. And if you look back at the history of Israelis that have been arrested spying on the States, it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. And then almost every single time, the Israeli government lobbies to have the US let them go. Let them go with no charges. And not just them, but it also happens in Europe. It happens here in Canada. I mean, there was even just we found out that what ended up happening with WhatsApp, the messaging app. And it turned out who was behind this back door into it to check your messages? Israel was the one behind this situation. So all this, I look at what Israel's trying to do. I don't like the treatment Israel does to the Palestinians. I mean, it's not, in that situation, it's not one way or the other. You can't really say that the poor Palestinians have been completely oppressed and haven't done anything to Israel. They have done things to Israel, without a doubt. But Israel has a much better control over the area, has a much better military, much more effective weapons, and they go in heavy-handed, and in a lot of situations, no wonder the Palestinians fight back. Gaza, it's an open-air prison. They are starting to fence off Gaza. They have it blockaded by the sea, won't let any supplies in unless Israel dictates it. They have controlled the calorie intake, meaning they manage how much food the Palestinians can eat. They have bulldoze their home and take it for themselves. They have annexed much of the territory in that situation. They have dropped white phosphorus gas on Gaza. It's either Gaza or the West Bank. But the point is that they have full out used white phosphorus again in a populated civilian zone. And I mean, you can find the videos of the Palestinians, supposedly, because I don't understand their language, of the Palestinians saying, the Jewish people are cockroaches or death to Israel. You can also find it the other way around with the Israelis talking about how the Palestinians are cockroaches and death to the Palestinians. Not to mention that they have no problem in gunning down civilians on their border, even if they don't pose a threat to the Israelis themselves. And there's plenty of videos there. You can go on Live Leaks and find them, and plenty of other places of people literally just holding a Palestinian flag, take a couple steps too close to the border wall, and they get gunned down by snipers. So this is why I don't consider myself pro-Israel anymore, and why I actually don't like the state of Israel, because they're no friend to anybody but themselves. I think I went on a long enough tangent on that. And I know that there's probably a lot of people that listen to me on this that will not agree whatsoever on my personal point of view. And you have your own reasons to either support the state of Israel or dislike the state of Israel. I have mine. I think I've laid out most of them, at least now. There's probably a few things that have slipped my mind that I could probably bring up in another time. But this is why I don't really consider myself a friend to the Israelis, a friend to Israel. And moving on to our final story of the day, and this is quite concerning too, and in a different way. This affects us here in Canada, and I don't like the way that this is going. Because not too long ago, a few months ago, the Prime Minister of Canada announced that he was going to give a $600 million bailout to the news media. And the Conservatives jumped on this immediately, willing to condemn them because they didn't like that. In fact, I remember Michelle Rempel ended up putting out a video where she ended up saying that this is the end of free speech in Canada. She should probably know that free speech was never really existed in Canada, because there's nothing in our charter or anything in the law that actually says that you have freedom of speech. You have freedom of expression, but even then they say up to a certain extent or something along those wording. We have hate speech laws, and you can't have both. It's one or the other. Either you have hate speech laws and you don't have free speech, or you have free speech. I consider myself a free speech absolutist. No laws on the book or any repercussion from government that's for what you say. Now, so they have been condemned. The Liberals have been condemned by the Conservatives. All the Conservative Party. Michelle Rempel put out this video where she ended up saying that it was the government buying off journalism in Canada, how this needs to be opposed, and just how terrible this decision was. And Andrew Scheer has been another one who took it to Trudeau to say how awful of a situation this was. Well, on Tuesday, June 11th, 2019, this article from blacklocks.ca ended up coming out. And I don't have a subscription to Blacklocks, so it only gives you the first paragraph or so. But as it says here, won't pledge to end bailout. Opposition leader Andrew Scheer yesterday would not commit any future Conservative cabinet to repealing a $595 million media bailout under the Income Tax Act. His remarks followed a disclosure of an untendered $5.5 million federal contract for communication research services to Post Media that endorsed Conservatives in the 2015 campaign. quote, "We're going to have our own plan," end quote. So, without looking more into the actual article itself, it's hard to say what his actual plan is. But I find it very concerning if he even has a plan to bail out the news media. Ironically, it's right as Post Media ends up getting their cut of $5.5 million out of all this. Again, endorse the conservatives. Let me be clear here. I am a right-winger, but I am a non-partisan. I will not support just a party for the sake of supporting a party. I've just never really been that way. I have supported parties in the past, but I've never been a loyal party supporter, you know? And personally, I was not exactly crazy about Andrew Scheer when he won the leadership of the Conservative Party. So I don't have any loyalty. I don't have loyalty amongst party lines. I don't have loyalty to the Conservative Party. I don't have loyalty to the People's Party of Canada. I have loyalty to my own philosophy, my own right-wing views, and that's it. And because of that, I find it allows me to be free in order to really have a principled stance, because I've kind of find that when I did support parties in the past, I've always sort of had that non-partisan approach, but I have supported one party or the other at times. And I always found that I was willing to sacrifice some of my principles in order to support a party or support a candidate. So the thing is, getting back to the story, I guess I just had to throw that in, just so that you knew where I was coming from. I'm not coming from a position of screw the Conservatives, yay People's Party of Canada, or screw the PPC, yay CPC. I am concerned either way. Doesn't matter what political party, what political affiliation, when they are willing to bail out the news media and pretty much buy them off. This is exactly what they're doing. This is exactly what Andrew Scheer accused the government of doing, and now he's going to turn around and implement his own plan, even if it's not so much. He's still willing to do it. This is also the man who said he's going to at least cut CBC funding if he got in because he didn't like their reporting. We've already seen what has come out of buying off the news media such as this. We've already seen how the news sources have started competing to be as pro-Trudeau as possible in order to get this bailout money. And it's been a shit show from the very beginning. Not Andrew Scheer. Justin Trudeau put the Unifor Union, which is one of the largest unions in Canada and also is unionized the most journalists in Canada. He's put them on the committee in order to decide how this bailout will be decided. Well, the Unifor Union came out and strictly pretty much put themselves out against the Conservatives. They have pretty much said that they are put out that whole fake Maclean's magazine cover where it says the Resistance, Andrew Scheer's worst nightmare. And even what was his name? Something Diaz, the leader, the president of the Unifor Union. His name is escaping me right now. Even he has come out and said on public, I guess radio, public corporate news, live, he said, Doug Ford, fuck you. So it kind of shows where he stands. And it's Jerry Diaz I was thinking of. He's the one who is the president of the Unifor Union. And he was the one who ended up saying, Doug Ford, fuck you. And he even appeared on the cover of this fake Maclean's magazine where he said, Andrew Scheer's worst nightmare. So they put a partisan union at the head of this, and there's more unions. I think there were 5 or 6 unions altogether deciding it, but this is the biggest union representing journalists. No doubt will have the biggest say in this whole situation. And without a doubt, it looks like this has been a buy-off of the media in support of the Liberal Party. I see no reason that Andrew Scheer would do it any differently. He would probably give the biggest cut to any news source that supported the Conservatives because of it. But I think that's really all I have for you guys today. I can't think of anything else that I need to cover. Anyway, Thank you for tuning in once again to the True North Report, and I'll be back soon with more news Canadians need to know.